Good afternoon and welcome to another A-Push video with Mr. Pate for Barlow High School. Today we're looking at Nixon foreign policy. Nixon, what an interesting study in contrast this guy is. Brilliant. You're going to see some really good things he does in foreign policy in general. And then he's such a paranoid disaster that he's going to ratchet up the secrecy and misleading nature of the Johnson administration to even higher levels with what becomes Watergate and the preceding events. Alright, his Secretary of State is Henry Kissinger. That's a name to know. There aren't that many Secretary of States that you need to know throughout U.S. history. He's one of the ones you would want to know because he does some very significant things, as you will see. Nixon, of course, domestically has a lot of issues, but foreign policy, he was pretty good. So let's take a look. The first thing is understanding this word. It's détente. Détente means an easing of tensions. This is going to be a strategy that's used by Nixon, and there's another term that Kissinger subscribes to, we want to know, called realpolitik, which means practical politics. Realpolitik is, okay, in terms of like what really do we need to do to see something get accomplished and be successful, and that's what he's going to use for détente. So the first thing Nixon's going to do in 1972 is he shocks the country and the world by saying he's going to visit China. Keep in mind, the United States had not recognized communist China forever, basically. It had taken a really, really long time. They didn't recognize them as a country. So Nixon is going to not only recognize them, he visits China itself, walks on the Great Wall, goes to all these diplomatic meetings, and basically has a grand old time there in China. When he's there, he agrees to normalize relations. He agrees not to back Taiwan too much, which is the one China policy. Taiwan is, after the Chinese Revolution, Taiwan, that little island which the Chinese call Formosa, it essentially, that's where all the nationalists who lost went into exile and took control of that. And the U.S. has basically backed that and always protected it, which makes it one of the biggest, if not the biggest area of conflict between the United States and China to this day is U.S. support and defense of of Taiwan against China, and it's this uneasy thing going on back and forth. So the visit to China, essentially, this is going to warm up relations, and the U.S. appears to back off a little bit on support of Taiwan, but they don't really that much, and the United States and China agree to have friendly, warmer relations. Now this was very alarming to the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union is thinking, hey, if the United States builds a friendly relationship with China, we might have our position as like the leading superpower communist country eroded. If the United States could get along with them and there's a Cold War with us, maybe other communist countries would look to them as the leader and it would harm us. We'd get frozen out. And the Soviet Union by the 1970s is starting to experience very serious economic problems, even though the United States, a typical American citizen did not know that. I'll show you a little bit of that in a minute. So he's going to follow this up by playing what they call the China card, going to the Soviet Union with Kissinger, and he visits Moscow and says that he'll try and improve relations with them. Now some good things come out of this. The United States agrees to sell the Soviet Union, who's so desperately short of farm production, he agrees to sell them $750 million a year worth of agricultural goods, which is good for U.S. farmers, and it's a win for them because they get these goods, they can buy them as a country to feed their people. So he's going to do that. They also are going to agree to SALT I, Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty is what SALT stands for, and they're going to, both sides agree, they pledge. It's like a sign of good things. They both say, let's reduce our aggressive offensive missile systems, let's reduce the amount of them we have and get to more of a keeping a defensive posture, but not as much of an offensive, like on the verge of war type of posture. So SALT I is not that significant, but it's a step in the right direction. It's more symbolically hopeful that détente is happening after the visits to China and the Soviet Union. So things have warmed up and improved, and I'll explain one of Nixon and Kissinger's motivations for this. One of them, détente, obviously was just a good and healthy thing anyhow, but let's talk about Chile first. Chile is going to popularly elect in a legitimate election. It's not like all these fixed elections that you saw, where, I mean, come on. If you're a dictator, let's make it a little bit realistic. Don't sit there and give yourself 99.8% of the vote and say, hey, I'm victorious. make it a little bit more realistic. I mean, 70% would be an astounding victory. In the United States, Barack Obama had a little over 55%, I believe, and that was a trouncing of massive proportions of McCain in 2008. You just don't really win popular elections. Not everybody agrees. You don't get like 80% ever. Not even in the worst circumstances. We see that in American society. But Allende is going to basically become this popularly elected Marxist. Yes, that's right. That makes him a communist. The United States doesn't like that, so they slap embargoes on Chile. Now keep in mind, the people of Chile have just chosen this of their free will. It has been a legitimate vote. They want communism. It's a third world country. But when the army starts to get involved, tell me if you've heard this before, Iran, possibly South Vietnam, the CIA is at least encouraging people that want to overthrow them. So the military, led by General Pinochet, is going to overthrow and topple Allende and take control. And then, of course, the United States warmly welcomes him, drops the embargo, and all of that. Now, you might think, well, this is something that would make China and the Soviet Union mad because Khrushchev, who's not there anymore, but he had said, we will support third world revolutionaries. And that kind of been the posture, especially the Soviet Union. But the relationship's been warmed up by détente, and this is in the Western Hemisphere, so those countries don't really do anything about this. Besides, the U.S. wasn't directly involved anyhow. Exit from Vietnam, this really shows you the value of the détente with these visits. Basically, North Vietnam was totally supplied and encouraged by China and the Soviet Union. So when Nixon is saying, I want to get to the peace table and get out of there, and I understand what will happen, that this is basically not going to be peace with victory, but we have to get out of there. I want to Vietnamize the war and get out of Vietnam. As you saw in the previous video, he basically is aided at the peace table. He's able to exit due to the détente relationship, and since they've warmed it up, he's able to say, I've worked with you, force the North Vietnamese to make a deal to get us out of there. And the Soviet Union and China do put pressure on North Vietnam to indeed do that. And so Nixon, as you can see, if you take out the example of Chile, they have a very successful time of lessening of tensions, improved relationships, and essentially the ability of the United States to finally extract itself from Vietnam coming under Nixon's foreign policy. Oh, if his domestic policy had had the same success. But that's all the time we have for today. Stay classy, Sam Barlow.